one of President Clinton's closest political advisors, has tried to spell this out in a compelling memo that can be seen as a kind of open letter to Washington and the establishment of both parties. In the memo published by Politico magazine, Sosnick argues that the growing income gap is pushing this country to a political tipping point. Quote, underneath this turmoil, you can see the shape of an emerging populist movement that will, in time, either move the politicians to action or throw them out of office. The country is moving toward new types of leaders, those who will be problem solvers and build institutions that are capable of making a difference in people's lives. So joining me now, Democratic strategist Steve McMahon, a veteran of several Senate and presidential campaigns. He's also co-founder of Purple Strategies. And Sarah Fagan, she's chief political strategist for DDC Advocacy. She was the White House political director for President George W. Bush. She's also a CNBC contributor. Hello,
and she's wearing purple.
And she's wearing purple.
And you're on, Steve. That's right.
And he's wearing red.
And I'm wearing red.
Yeah, what's going on? This is all. Sarah, I want to start with you. In Sosnick's memo, there was some other compelling lines in there when he was talking about this rise of the populist movement. Right. He was basically saying it's why Rand Paul and Elizabeth Warren probably have as much more in common, particularly on economics, than some members inside their own parties.
It is. They have more in common on economics, but they have more in common on other issues. You see Kristen Gillibrand and Ted Cruz coming together to take on top military brass. Right. You know, we're talking about Rand Paul being a major contender for the Republican nomination in 2016 on a platform that it's okay if Iran gets a nuclear weapon. That would have been unheard of in the Republican Party 4 or 8 years ago.
I think it still might be unheard of in the Republican.
We'll
see. But the fact is, he's not going to
win. I don't think he's going to win.
He's not being thrown out of the party for this stance.
He's going to get a significant percentage of the vote, most likely.
Well, and this goes to this inward look, right? Essentially, there are much of the country, but particularly parts of the country that feel as if somebody's been unfair to them. You know, whether it's big money people, rich people have been unfair, taking away middle-class jobs. That's been the left's argument. Or on the right, the Tea Party saying, you know, government picks winners and losers. They've been unfair to me. This is what I think both parties are. They rhetorically get it, but they haven't figured out how to govern to the populace.
They haven't, and you're right. It's sort of the people versus the powerful, and pick your powerful as enemy. If you're a Republican, it's, you know, it's
Bob Trump is going to just love that he just heard that phrase, the people versus the powerful.
It's Al Gore all over again, isn't it?
Back before, though, that this was such a bubbling issue.
So I don't think either party has quite mastered how to govern this way, but I think the Democratic Party is actually closer to figuring it out, because fundamentally, that's what the Democratic Party is all about, having the government help people, growing the economy from the middle out. The Republicans believe generally that we should grow the economy from the top down, that if the wealthy make more money, they'll spend it, and that will grow the economy and lift everybody up. I don't think it's worked. I think most people would say it hasn't worked.
Well, Sarah, to back up Steve here, politically that message has worked. I mean, the president took this economic inequality fact, and he drove it home, and then Mitt Romney says 47%, and it just sort of cemented the argument that the president was trying to make. Now, he hasn't governed as a fixer on this issue.
He hasn't, and I think Obamacare has really hurt his ability to govern on this particular topic. But, you know, to your broader point, you can't argue with the statistics. The facts are the facts, and there is a growing inequality gap in this country, and Republicans need to come up with better solutions, new solutions. We still fall into the trap of talking about the flat tax and other economic theories 30 years ago.
And they only seem to benefit those who have money.
We need our governors to step forward with new ideas, and I think that will happen, and I think that will be the rebirth of the Republican Party.
What I've been trying to figure out, though, is why we're talking about here the potential divides. The Republican Party, we see the divide bigger right now because of the Tea Party movement. The Democratic Party, as soon as if they're get out of power, we'll see the divide there too. It happens. Why aren't we seeing a third party movement? Why aren't we seeing independent candidates run for the House and the Senate and gubernatorial election? Because I think the public is screaming for it.
The public is screaming.
They don't like either party right now.
Or dare I say, a purple party?
Yeah.
No, but you ask a good question, Chuck, and the answer is, it lies in two facts. The first is gerrymandering. It's almost impossible for a third party, first of all, to qualify for the ballot, and secondly, to have any chance of winning. So what you're seeing now is you're seeing Democrats who are vulnerable, really more to primary challengers from the left, Republicans who are vulnerable more to primary challenges from the right than they are in general elections. And that's a bad thing for the country, I think, because it drives the polarization of politics and makes it even worse.
But if you saw some of these people run as independents in Senate races, I mean, look at what Ross Perot did, frankly, to fix both parties. arguably, you know, in 1992. You know,
wrong messenger, but right.
You know, he was not the greatest messenger, but he was getting at this issue. This was 1992, talking about the pressure the middle class was going to be feeling going forward. And by the way, look at where we are 20 years later. He looks like a savant. He
does. And this country is ripe for an independent movement. And the other reason is it's just really hard to get on the ballot in a presidential race. And
forget the presidency. I always think that we focus too much on that. Imagine how the U.S. Senate could be shaken up by 5 independents.
It could, but all movements need a leader. And one person running in a state isn't going to take on the movement. If the right person with the right network, including wealthy, and the right amount of personal money to invest, he or she could really shake up presidential politics in this country.
Well, and that's where my guess is that the next billionaire that tries to do this comes from technology.
New York? Bloomberg?
No. Comes from Silicon Valley.
It's a very interesting point.
Does not come from Bloomberg. Does not come from oil or, you know, the old ways of money. Comes from the new money.
Probably so, but I think the approach that you've just outlined, Chuck, is an easier and more practical approach. 5 or 6 or 8 people running as independents in states and saying basically, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm somebody who's going to go and represent the people. I mean, you know, Ross Perot fixed some things in 1992, 100 years before Ross Perot, or almost 100 years before
Teddy Roosevelt.
William Jennings Bryan.
Well, William Jennings Bryan did the same
some
thing.
Things. And, you know, at that time, the populist movement was all about, let's have a federal income tax, let's regulate the railroads and the banks, and let's elect senators directly and not have them be appointed by the aristocrats.
Well, so this all goes to the point where it seems the public is desperate to deny either party a victory in 2014. That's sort of been my thesis of what the midterms were really going to be about, and that it may end up status quo because of that, and that's why I'm wondering why there aren't third-party candidates.
Well, it's a good question, and whatever the outcome in 2014, neither party is going to win. It's just going to be which party does the worst in making their case.
David Brooks said, you know, both who commits suicide last, right? And we thought it was a pretty good line. Anyway,
very good line.
Steve McMahon, Sarah Fagan.
Thank you.
2 smart people to talk about this. The elusive Doug Sosnick.
The elusive.
We know he's watching.
You know, I do a lot of work with him.
At his home office somewhere.
He's out there.
His home office somewhere. He knows we've been talking about his memo. Anyway, thank you both. Still to come, everything you ever wanted to know about Bitcoin. Steve McMahon's a big investor in Bitcoin, I bet.
Big, huge.
Plus, Bill Clinton brings back his "I didn't inhale" quote. Wait till you see what he says about it now. That's just one of the gems in today's data bank. But first, today's trivia question. Who was the last Democratic medical doctor to serve in the U.S. Senate? I've had a lot of Republican doctors in the Senate lately. Who's the last Democratic doctor? First person to tweet the correct answer to @Chuck Todd and @Daily Rundown will get the on-air shout-out. The answer more coming up on TDR.